Welcome to the Homeschooling Global Summit. I'm Ken Danford, and today my guest is Jacob Abernethy. Hello, Jacob.
Hi, everyone.
Jacob is an original member from the first year of what was then called Pathfinder and is now known as North Star.
I still call it Pathfinder, to be clear, when people ask me about it. I'm like, oh, Pathfinder. I'm like, oh, wait. And it changed. The name changed very soon after it started, too. So I somehow still haven't adapted.
That's quite okay. It warms my heart. You can call it Pathfinder all you want. It's quite okay. I know exactly what you mean. And so do all the people from your era. So that was back in 1996, 97, Jacob Abernethy. But before we get to back then, let's talk about now. How old are you now? Where are you? What are you doing with your life?
I'm 38 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a professor, an associate professor of computer science at the Georgia Institute of Technology.
You're an associate professor at Georgia Tech. Do they know you didn't go to high school like a normal kid?
You know, it comes up in conversation sometimes, and I usually drop it for effect when appropriate. Particularly when I teach undergrads. At the end of the course, when I'm telling them that, you know, maybe their grade wasn't perfect, I will often mention, oh, and by the way, I'm a high school dropout, so like, you know, no big deal if you didn't like do great this course. Like, I don't, you know, and no judgment for me. I couldn't even finish high school.
All right. So that is a funny, you know, juxtaposition or a big jump, a lot of gap. And so just briefly, do you mind going in reverse of how you ended up at Georgia Tech, what you've been doing the last, say, 10, 15 years?
Should I do like a memento where we don't even know where I actually started from? No, okay. So let me start from so after, should I go back to undergrad maybe, or should I?
Oh, I was just going in reverse though. Just
okay,
before
so
Georgia Tech.
Before Georgia Tech, I was professor at the University of Michigan for 4 years. That was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That started in 2013. I did 2 years before that at the University of Pennsylvania as a postdoctoral fellow in the computer science department there. Before that, I did 5 years at the University of California at Berkeley as a Ph.D. student from 2006, 2011. Before that, I did 2 years at the Toyota Technological Institute in Chicago, which is essentially at the University of Chicago in Chicago, Illinois. And then before that, I spent 2 years living in the Boston area, actually, I did a bunch of things, including going to France and Israel during that time. And before that, I spent 2 years at MIT getting an undergrad degree. And before that, I spent 2 years at UMass. And now we're getting closer to when I was at Pathfinder, also known as North Star.
Right. Isn't that, so you just rattled off a bunch of super famous tech schools that you must have done well at since you're still alive and looking as fresh and happy as you look. That doesn't make sense for someone who couldn't manage high school, Jacob Abernethy. How could you go to all these fancy colleges but not manage high school back in the day?
Well, now I guess we're getting into, maybe it's hard for me to remember what I was like exactly when I was 14 years old. Probably Ken has a better memory of my behavior in those days, but I didn't really, starting at the age of 14, I started to not feel like I was fit in very well in Amherst Junior High School, or I guess it was middle school. They called it junior high school. And I started to like, I don't know. I mean, things sort of started to spiral in my 9th grade year. And my grades, started to decline, and I got more and more frustrated with teachers and my classes. And I was always good at certain topics, particularly like mathematical topics. I was like generally one of the better students in the class, but I started to have fights with I remember my math teacher in the 9th grade. I ended up getting kicked out of a geometry class like permanently, even though I remember actually being pretty good at it. It was sort of a funny experience. I still remember that teacher's name, by the way, but I won't mention it. So that's kind of how it started. And then like by the end of my 9th grade year, it was pretty clear that like I was like not anywhere. I was not nearly one of the good students. In fact, I was probably one of the bad students in Amherst Junior High School. And then,
well, you knew Joshua Hornick, co-founder of Pathfinder. He was your science teacher.
He was my teacher probably in the 8th grade, I think.
Right.
I think it was the 8th grade. He was my science teacher, and I remember him talking about his experience as a teacher. I think he'd just come in, actually. I remember a lot of stories. He just arrived, was talking about, his, how he ended, because he'd been a lawyer before that, like a corporate lawyer, and ended up moving into this teaching job, which was very interesting. And he had a lot of interesting things to say, and I remember being very enamored by a lot of his ideas, and was, quite inspired by the things that he said. And I found him just to be a very personal guy as well. So I remember him being quite a mentor in those days.
And what I remember about when we met and when you were spiraling down in ninth grade, I guess, was that you were kind of mischievous. I don't know that you were really a bad kid per se, but my romantic memory of it is you were the guy always doing card tricks under your desk, and then when the teacher caught you, you'd be like, "Hey, pick a card," and like you try to make a joke out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I had these other interests that were developing at the time. I think in ninth grade, I started, maybe it was like seventh or eighth grade, I started doing magic stuff. I had a couple books, was learning how to be a magician, and then picked up juggling, I think, when I was 14, so in the ninth grade. And by the way, but within like a year or two, I was like a very good juggler. I mean, my magic skills were pretty good, but I was like a very talented juggler, like, one of the best. I mean, definitely like maybe among the top 2 or 3 like under 18 jugglers in the state of Massachusetts. So that took a lot of my time, and that kind of like that kind of weird side interest was probably, I guess I probably felt like I wasn't being very well respected for my talents because they didn't get me very far in my academic career at the time.
Well, let's just talk about that stuff for a moment. We'll come back to the actual transition in a second because we're already on to juggling. I remember juggling, magic tricks. I remember unicycling. You showed up in our backyard at Pathfinder on a unicycle one time, and then all broke loose because you were doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
One of my magic balls right here. See,
Oh.
This is class thing where you can get the thing to just, anyway, it vanishes from your hand.
Oh my God.
The camera was better than we could see everything. But anyway,
sorry,
go ahead.
All right,
I'm interrupting you.
So you were that kind of guy, and I remember that very shortly, either you were only with us a year, but within that time frame, you were performing at Faneuil Hall in Harvard Square. You had to get a permit. You had to audition, right?
That may have been a year after Pathfinder, actually, that I was doing that stuff. But it was in the same zone. I mean, I was 17 when I started doing that stuff.
Right.
So within a couple of years, I started doing entertainment probably at the age when I was 16. So around the same time, I started working on this career. I met some entertainers in the Boston area who began hiring me for like little side jobs. Then the street performing stuff started, I think, when I had moved to like the Boston area. But yes, I used to take the train in and work at Harvard Square, Faneuil Hall. And that happened actually throughout my like late teens and early 20s, which led into, I mean, I actually ended up with sort of a career basically. In fact, when I graduated from undergraduate, I had, I had this career going that actually I kept going. Essentially, I didn't take a job. I tried to do this entertainment stuff full time. So now people who know me back then, they ask me, so, oh, what do you do these days? Are you still juggling? And I'm like, I'm a professor now. I don't like do it a lot. And they're like, oh, that's too bad. It's like I'm a failure basically for having given it up to a large extent.
You well, we're jumping ahead because it's
sorry.
When you were at UMass as an undergrad, you, as I recall, walked onto the Funniest Man on Campus contest.
There was a comedy competition that happened, I think, around 1999 or 2000. And they said, like, who wants to do, who wants to like try like do a 5-minute set or whatever? And there's going to be this big event with like couple of famous comedians who were there. And they asked, so you could just sign up. And I said, oh, and I'd been doing these shows in Boston, comedy juggling shows. So I signed up and did this like 5-minute bit. And they had 15 other students, and I won the competition at UMass. And it was the funniest student at UMass was like my title after that. And that led into a couple of other big name events that I could talk about.
You opened for David Chappelle or Sinbad?
So first I was asked to do an opening act for Sinbad, who is not as well known now, but was like, like one of the top comedians in the country when he came to UMass Amherst, to do a show. That was like later that year after I won this comedy competition. I did like a 15-minute opening set for Sinbad doing part of my juggling show. Then I went and then when Dave Chappelle came to town, they also asked me to do an opening act for Dave Chappelle. And of course, Dave Chappelle's career is weird because he sort of was popular in those days when I was in college, and he had a hiatus, and then now he's sort of very well known again. But that was fun. So I got to do an opening act from the early days of Dave Chappelle's comedy career.
So by the time you were a late teenager, you had risen from the ashes of being a 9th grade nitwit. But let's go back to the 9th grade moment. You were imploding in Amherst Regional High School, which for all intents and purposes is a decent high school. Yeah. But you didn't want to be there. You were mucking up the works. You were getting in trouble. And somehow you came into Pathfinder with your mom. She wasn't all that gung-ho about us at first, was she?
She was not at all.
Not at all.
I'm actually surprised we even convinced her to say yes to this ever. I don't actually know. I don't know how we did that. I mean, like my mom is very stubborn. I don't know why she would have agreed to this, but she needed to do something. I think she was aware that she needed to do something, and this seemed like something to her. So
She's a
yeah,
doctor.
she was a physician a single mom physician in Amherst. And my dad was not far, but like, I mean, she was basically making decisions for her kids, and I was the bad kid. And I think she realized like, okay, something needed to happen. And I think she was probably aware that Amherst High School or Amherst system wasn't ideal for someone like me. And I don't think she really knew how to manage that. And of course, she had her full-time job as a doctor. She couldn't, be a teacher
Right.
or something.
And so she really wanted you to come hang out with us at Pathfinder, but she wanted you to do real homeschooling academic work during those years. And that didn't really happen. And we just kept saying, but look, he's such a nice boy. And what do you remember about that year at North Star, at Pathfinder?
I mean, I guess I did academic stuff during that time. I remember like reading books and teaching myself stuff. And, but it wasn't particularly directed. I don't know. I don't think that she was always very satisfied with I think she wanted more official, markers of progress. And I'm not sure in the end if she was like super satisfied in those first 6 months. And there was a lot of tension about that. And I mean, for her, I think she just thought like, oh gosh, I've taken this guy out of school, and all of a sudden it doesn't appear that he's, being quote unquote productive in any sort of typical measure sense.
You were literally being a clown and being good at it. And
well, I spent a lot of my time during the day. I wasn't going to school, so I spent a lot of my time during the day. For example, practicing juggling. I remember spending probably 2 hours a day doing that stuff. I was also doing mathematical stuff as well. And I was reading books on chemistry and things like that, but, maybe less seriously. But I was, I don't think I was making a lot of progress on a lot of the other topics that I wasn't as excited about at the time.
That's more or less how I remember it. In fact, there's a movie out this year called Self-Taught, and there's a character in there who reminds me of you a little bit, a younger version of you. He's now at UCLA, I think, or some California university, being a doctoral student. At any rate,
cool.
Here's my wife. So, remember Tamara? Remember Jacob?
Hi, of course I do. Hi there.
I remember you. Nice to see you.
Yes.
All right. Well, to the people of the conference, that's Tamara. Meanwhile, so we had this year together where you were at Pathfinder, we were hanging. It was really, really quite interesting, fascinating, and you were quite active. But at the end of the year, you had to move to Acton.
Yeah.
And when you got to Acton, I think two things happened. One is you got a job at the Acton Science Discovery Center. So you got to do all your magic tricks for real with physics things in a museum, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then you took some college classes there, right?
So that year, which would have been my junior year in high school, I moved to, Acton is about, maybe 18 miles from Boston or something. I used to take the train in and would take classes at Harvard University's night school program, which is called Harvard Extension School. So I took 3 classes a semester in what would have been my junior year in high school. And that was most of my time. Most of my time was spent doing that. And that was, by the way, a pretty good experience. That ended up being, it was sort of an interesting transition. I started with Pathfinder, which was sort of very undirected, and then ended up, and I should mention that the last summer that I spent in Amherst, I took a class in calculus at UMass while I was a Pathfinder person. That was part of my, I guess, education at the time. And to note that I did quite well there. And that was notable that at the age of, 15, 16, I was somehow able to get through a calculus course.
Right. And let me just give you back from Joshua and me that you were making our theory real. You were our first batch of kids. You weren't the only person doing college early. Many of your cohort from Pathfinder have gone on to be quite successful and professional grads. One's a superintendent, all kinds of successes. But we were learning with you, like, oh, this thing actually works. Look, Jacob doesn't go to school, and now he's doing Harvard Extension and Acton Science Discovery. He got the calculus. And then you decided you wanted to come back to Amherst to UMass.
Yes. So after doing that 1 year at Harvard Extension School, I applied I had to get a GED, which I remember taking the GED test, and I had the worst subject I had was the math subject, which always puzzled me. I went and got the GED and then applied to UMass and was accepted, and even into the honors program at the age of 16. I got accepted, and when came back to Amherst, moved into the dorms in Amherst. My mom had by that point moved away, and was suddenly a UMass student, and had spent essentially 2 years there.
And one of the funny things about that is you would sort of caught up in credentials and leveling at UMass to your older brother, who had played life straight and narrow to that point.
To give some credit to this situation, I mean, probably I had missed a number of courses and things that maybe weren't as interesting to me. And even to this day, I joke that I was just talking today to a undergraduate, and I said, I know nothing about chemistry. Never had to take a chemistry class in my life. So there are gaps as a result of having not gone through high school. But yes, in terms of the things that I was working on, my collegiate level was, I was basically at a collegiate level at the age of 17. And in fact, I was teaching math. I was basically an undergrad TA in my freshman year. So I was actually teaching people at that point. So I was, in some sense, maybe a sophomore or junior level by the time I arrived at UMass at the age of 17.
So what was, by this point, your mother and brother's response? Like, oh, Jacob got away with it. He didn't do high school. He didn't do Amherst. But now look, he went to Boston. He's back at UMass in the honors program, transferring to MIT. Did they finally were they happy with, seem to approve of your whole path, or did they resist, or what was their family dynamic like for you?
I think by the time, I don't think my mom and I had a good relationship while I was at Harvard Extension School. I think it improved dramatically when I got to UMass, particularly when it became clear that I was sort of an academic star at UMass in my first and second year there. I think my brother was probably pissed off that his younger brother had somehow leapfrogged him. And I'm sure that wasn't we were very competitive brothers. So I don't think he was super pleased about it. We didn't have a good relationship in those days. But my mom, I think she turned around entirely by the time I was suddenly doing well at UMass. And then eventually, of course, when I transferred to MIT, when I applied to MIT and was accepted, I think, which was her alma mater. I think she was, like, oh, wow, this really turned around. Yeah.
So I get the idea that you feel you have some gaps in your subject knowledge because you didn't do high school traditionally, but you should know that lots of other people who did do high school traditionally feel the same way. They may have had a bad teacher for a chemistry class. They faked and got a grade or a medium grade in some class they didn't really like. Faking it and pretending you know more than you, or you learned more than we actually did in high school is kind of common for everybody. You just don't have any faking about it. You're just like, I didn't do it.
Yeah. I think a lot about how it was that I was able to do so well in that calculus class that summer, because it seems like I missed 3 years of two and a half to 3 years of high school mathematics. And then suddenly took this course, which would have been a freshman level course, and it wasn't the easy calculus. It was the calculus for engineering. It was a harder one. And somehow I was the best student in the class. I was this 16-year-old amongst all these, college kids. And I had to catch up on a few things. I didn't know about sine and cosine, I think, when I got there. Maybe I know a little bit about it, but I didn't know much. But it was surprising how easy it was for me to catch up on those topics. And I had to go to the TA, and I had to go and ask my dad, I think, for stuff. But very quickly, given the fact that I was quite motivated to learn that stuff, and I also found that the experience was much better. One of the things that I noted while I was taking this course was that the fact that the teacher doesn't care that I'm here, whether I'm here or not, and I could go to the bathroom whenever without asking for permission, that made the experience a lot better. It was just purely, it was an intellectual thing. I wasn't being, my behavior wasn't being managed. My time wasn't being managed. They were simply saying, if you want to come and see what I write on the board, you're welcome to. And for me, that was exciting. I was like, oh, I can just show up and listen to this guy, and he's going to explain things to me. That's cool. He doesn't really care who I am or what my, which was not the experience I had in high school. In high school, I just felt like I was being yelled at all the time, which, makes it very hard to be open to someone teaching you stuff. So yeah, the dynamic was just very different dynamic in these college courses.
And I assume, I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to just say it out loud for the viewers here, that once you went through UMass, did well, transferred into MIT and did well, you're on your way, nobody post those moments ever has actually cared about what you did for high school in 9th, 10th, 11th grade.
Quite the contrary, people are find it to be kind of a badge of honor it's something, I mean, I brag about it. I'm like, oh, by the way, I didn't finish high school, just to be clear, and some people sometimes go, what? But, it's like, oh yeah, I just did this other thing and, it was fine, and they're like, well, don't you have a degree? I was like, oh, I have a GED. It's like, it's kind of easy.
Right.
No, I mean, it doesn't come up. I mean, at this point, I mean, I don't mention it on my resume just because like you don't usually get to my point and have your high school mention your resume. But I think I used to mention that I didn't finish Amherst High School on my resume. But, once I had, MIT and once I had other places, it was like, okay, well, those things block anything that happened before. I mean, it's not relevant.
So the deep question then of the moment is seriously like, what have you taken from the fact? I mean, other than it's a funny joke to shock people with, that you didn't actually do high school and you just excelled on your own, and then at all these colleges. Does it matter? I mean, what's internalized for you from the idea that in 9th grade school was a disaster and you just opted out?
Well, it did teach me one thing in particular. Well, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I will say, like, one thing I learned from that experience is that it taught me that, like, I have the fact that I'm willing to kind of go around the normal route to do things, and that I'm very willing to like explore something which would be kind of unusual. It's a very helpful skill, particularly in academia, where you're really rewarded for creativity and doing things in an unusual fashion, and sort of saying, oh, I could go this way instead, and I see that everyone else is going that way, and being comfortable with sort of deviating from what would be sort of mainstream approaches to things. That, like, it's like a skill and an approach to life that, like, I don't know how you can learn that. It's like, I don't know how you could. It's very hard to develop those things unless you've had an opportunity to kind of like be in the situation that I was in, and succeed in that environment. So, and I think that, like, that may be one of my strongest kind of meta skills. Yeah.
Right. So, but I would like to argue just the contrary for a second, that you being you, even if you had flamed out and been a negative dropout of Amherst High without us and just bottomed out in 10th grade, you would have started doing all these other cool things sooner or later. You would have created your own opportunities. You would have become a mathematician and a computer scientist anyway, probably sooner or later.
Yeah. I mean, I will say it's hard to know what would have happened. I mean, all kinds of things would have happened. I mean, maybe I would have found another interest or something, but like, the question is, would I have been sour on academics by the time I was 18? And I was sour at 14, and then sort of like realized, like, oh, that was just like the environment. That wasn't the actual academic part of it. It was just the experience, not the actual like intellectual part of it, learning and research and whatever. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I think like, I'm not 100% sure that I would have been as open to, I could have just been a lazy college kid. Like, I could have just turned into a lazy college kid and things wouldn't have worked out.
Well, would have been an entertainer then by now.
Maybe I would have gone in the entertainment direction. That's true. Maybe I would have focused more on that. That's a good point. That's actually a good point. Maybe that's the direction that we've gone in. Maybe that would have been a fun direction. I mean, I do occasionally think, like, wouldn't it have been more fun if I'd been like an artistic, type rather than a mathematical type or whatever. Not that those things are mutually exclusive, but I went into a more straight and narrow direction rather than getting on stage and performing for thousands of people, which I did really enjoy in those days.
Do you ever do the occasional talent show or open mic these days?
Well, they asked me to. At times, I get asked to do things like my students will ask me to do it in class. So I teach big lecture classes sometimes, and like at the end of class, I will do a show. And if you look on the Juggling Professor on Facebook, if you just search for the Juggling Professor, you'll probably find videos of me. Someone put up a Facebook page of videos of me doing silly stuff on.
I don't know if anybody watching cares, but I'm going to ask you this question. I won't be able to understand the answer to, but do you have a field or a specialty in this world that people would understand? What's your focus?
Well, I mean, my research is in machine learning, and I would generally say I do like theoretical foundations of machine learning, so like mathematics of machine learning. So machine learning wasn't a very popular thing when I started getting into it about 15 years ago, but it seems like now every news article is talking about machine learning. So at a high level, it's like designing algorithms that, that try to take advantage of data to do some predictive thing, like, figure out whether an image contains a person or not, using their face, or being able to autonomously drive a vehicle. Those are a lot of that involves a lot of machine learning problems. Now, I don't do the applied stuff where actually we implement these things, but I tend to spend a lot of my time thinking about the algorithmic limits of this set of problems and methods.
And you like being a professor? You like teaching?
Yeah, I find it fun. I find it fun being this, in front of a class, and I enjoy that. The fact that I get to make my own schedule, and most of my work is, intellectual, and I'm like, doing with ideas and trying to mentor people and trying to like right now, I spend most of my time on the phone with grad students and undergrads, trying to get them into doing productive research and making suggestions and saying, oh, what about this direction? What about that paper? Have you thought about this? That's a lot of my time these days is, trying to sort of nudge others to be creative as well. I mean, my brain is old now. I have trouble coming up with new ideas, but the younger people still, they don't have the experience and the skills that I have, but they actually still have like energy and, idea generation, which is, I feel like something you lose as you get older.
And do you ever encounter young people who are struggling in high school that remind you of your own situation?
I occasionally meet undergraduates who are struggling, and they often, I think I'm considered to be a very approachable professor. So I end up I have over the years done a lot of therapy for undergraduates. And those are the times when I love to tell people that I didn't finish high school and that I was, a bad kid and had all kinds of problems. Because, they find it like, oh my God, this person is something so much more vulnerable to me than I thought he was, than he was before. So that's fun. And I find I'm pretty good at that, like, talking to students who are struggling with something. And oftentimes it's not quite the things that I was struggling with, but, family issues or depression or anxiety issues, or like I having trouble managing my, you have to deal with these kinds of students a lot because, they will often stop showing up to class or taking completes and things like that. So that's mostly my interaction. Non-high school students as much, just because I don't have that many opportunities to interact with people that are still in high school. And I occasionally talk to people in high school, but they're generally, kind of the nerdy high school stars, not the ones who are struggling. So I'll admit that I'm a little bit out of the community in that respect.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that's most of my questions. Do you have any other final thoughts when the topic of Pathfinder runs through your head? That what are the main associations or memories you have that you want to share right now?
Well, I will say that it's one thing that was very memorable about the experience is that, when you're in junior high school and you treat all of your teachers, when you feel like all of your teachers are adversaries in this environment, they're like the bad people. Your friends are most of the good people, not all of them. Your peers are most of the good people, not all of them, of course. You have people you don't like in school. But the idea that these two teachers in junior high sort of emerged as being the good guys and somehow managed to steward my career out of junior high school is kind of amazing. And it was very easy to jump on board because you're like, well, these two people, this is you and Josh, were aware of like the experience in this place. We're able to like provide a well-reasoned perspective on that. And then to say, here is an alternative method that actually can be, you can be just as successful or more successful by doing this instead, was very helpful. And it's like, it's very rare to have that opportunity because, obviously anyone can go and look at marketing materials of any organization, but having the ability to talk directly to, a teacher who says, you don't have to do this whole school thing. There's other ways to do it was kind of phenomenal. And I don't know if I had been in another high school, I don't know what would have happened. It's very weird to think that like my trajectory of my life was very heavily based on kind of my, personal experience, particularly with Josh, because who I knew first because I had him as a teacher. But it was so based on that relationship. Of course, many things in your life are based on a kind of a random relationship that you had with someone, but this one seemed like a particularly critical relationship and, and connection that I made, to you guys early on in my in my youth. And I guess I can't thank you guys enough for that, because I feel like I tell people, like, the best decision. Look, I've made a lot of decisions before. It's like, but most of them were like not that hard. Like the hard one was like leaving high school. Like that seemed like really hard. It seems like everything was stacked against that. And it was like, that was like, you're like, everyone is telling you. Like, I remember guidance counselors saying, like, you're going to understand later when you're older, like, that I was right. And it was like, no, you were wrong. Like, I was right. Like, and like most people won't have that opportunity to actually check that. Like, they think when they tell you that, like, you're never going to know the alternative. It's like, no, but I did do the alternative and actually worked out better for me. So that kind of, that's an interesting thing to think back to now. And I do occasionally think back to that, to those comments that I had from teachers in junior high and high school.
All right. Well, let's end with that. Thank you. That's very kind. I actually share your own wondering sometimes about my encounters with Joshua too, at the right time in my life to meet someone like him as well, to become my colleague and partner to found North Star. Like, what would have happened? I'd be some school principal or something. So
yeah,
I share that with you. All right, Jacob Abernethy, thank you so much for sharing your story. This is great fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Ken, for getting back in touch.
The Juggling Professor is how they can find you.
On Facebook, or you can just look up my name and you can find out other things about me. But yes.